Hi, my name is Megan Sweeney, and this is my EDUC 701 presentation for Morningside College. My research study is called Effects of Sustained Silent Reading on Elementary School Students' Vocabulary Growth. The big problem that drove me to design this research study was a NAEP reading test from 2017, the results that I found. 63% of fourth graders were not proficient in the area of comprehension. That is over half of the fourth graders in this country that are not proficient in reading comprehension. And I also noticed that over the years, those percentages have remained pretty much the same, and there's been no significant amount of growth. I chose this topic because my district started the MAP reading test or MAP tests a couple years ago, and I thought I kind of noticed a pattern. Highly motivated readers that read a lot of text, they're interested in the book they're reading, they read a lot. They tended to have higher MAP vocabulary scores than the fourth graders that were really not motivated to read, that read really small amounts of text, if any at all. They tended to have lower scores on the MAP vocabulary test. So I read some literature, and I wanted to look at, well, why are comprehension scores low in the United States? And one reason is motivation. There could be just a lack of motivation to read. So in a NAEP report, it found that fourth grade students that read large amounts of text for enjoyment every day did better than students that read 5 or less per day. So the amount of reading that students engage in is directly related to comprehension. Another thing I looked at was vocabulary knowledge. Vocabulary knowledge plays a vital role in comprehension proficiency. There's a study done that looked at both vocabulary knowledge and comprehension, and it found that the students that scored low on comprehension had low vocabulary skills. So vocabulary is an important predictor in reading comprehension. Here are two past interventions. The first one was was a true sustained silent reading intervention to evaluate attitudes and practices. And what the researcher found is that at the beginning, students were just picking the first book that they saw. They weren't interested in it. But when the researcher actually implemented a true sustained silent reading program, they saw drastic changes in student motivation to read. Another intervention looked at direct instruction versus free voluntary reading, which is similar to sustained silent reading, in respect to vocabulary growth. So is it direct instruction or free voluntary reading, which is going to give us a higher vocabulary growth. The researcher did a whole class lesson focused on specific target words. And then the other intervention was just the students were given time every day to read popular fiction text. And what they found was that giving them time to read popular fiction text was actually more beneficial when it came to learning new words. So the more that they read, the more vocabulary knowledge was acquired. So the flow theory was a theoretical framework that I thought that fit best with my research design. And so the flow theory is a feeling that occurs when completely involved in task, as well as the ability to achieve the given task. They're so deeply in tune with what's going on that everything else just kind of falls away. But in order for there to be flow, there needs to be a balance of challenge and skill. If whatever task someone is doing is too challenging and they have low skills in that, it's going to cause anxiety. And on the flip side, if they have really high skills in something, but there's just not enough of a challenge, it's going to cause a lot of boredom. So what does that have to do with my research design, my research study? Well, the 5-finger rule is what I use to determine if the text was at their level or if it was too easy or too difficult. So the students would just read a first page of the book they're interested in, and for every word they didn't know, they'd put up a finger. So they put up 0 or 1 fingers. That means it's too easy of a text. It's not going to be enough of a challenge. They put up 2, 3, or 4 fingers. That means 2, 3, or 4 words they don't know. That's going to be just enough of a challenge for them to overcome. But if they put up 5 or more, that means that text is going to be too difficult and they're not going to understand it and they're going to get frustrated. So what is the gap in the research? I found ample research on sustained silent reading and its effect on reading and motivation in students. I found lots of research on volume of text, the amount of text read, and its impact on vocabulary growth, but I found very little research on sustained silent reading as an actual intervention for vocabulary growth. The purpose of this study was to implement a sustained silent reading intervention to measure growth in the area of vocabulary. My hypothesis was that students that receive 15 minutes of daily sustained silent reading for 6 weeks will have more growth on the reading map test in the area of vocabulary than fourth graders that did not receive sustained silent reading time. My independent variable is sustained silent reading. My dependent variable is the map reading test, and it was a quantitative research to determine the impact of sustained silent reading on vocabulary growth. What are the possible impacts if sustained silent reading really does work? Well, for teachers, it can help them make instructional decisions on if they actually want to implement a sustained silent reading program. If it's successful, they can find 15 minutes of the day for sustained silent reading instead of looking for other methods that don't work. So the more vocabulary, the more they're reading, and the higher vocabulary growth that they can have if this is successful, the more their comprehension will increase. So this is a very important intervention for all teachers. As a practitioner, if it works, I'm going to continue sustained silent reading. If it doesn't work, I'm going to look into different interventions that have been proven to produce vocabulary growth so my comprehension scores can go up. So this research design is quasi-experimental, which means that I chose which students were going in each group. The researchers, or my fourth grade general education class was the experimental group, and one of the other fourth grade classes was the control group. The experimental group had 16 participants, 50% female, 50% female, 50% male, and the control group had 15 participants, 40% were female, and 60% were male. There are a total of 4 special education students. 1 was in the experimental group and 3 in the control group. And then there were varying SES and racial backgrounds, but it was predominantly Caucasian in both groups. We used Acer Chromebooks that were provided by the district, the NWEA secure testing application, which just makes sure that students can only be on the MAP test and not on anything else, and then books of varying ability levels, fiction and nonfiction, and the MAP reading test, which is the largest collection of student growth data in the United States. And it cannot be measured as test-retest reliability because the students will never take the exact same test twice, but they will be a similar structure and content just with different difficulty levels. So both groups took the MAP reading test to get a baseline score for the pre-assessment. The experimental group was taught the 5-finger rule. They had 15 minutes of sustained silent reading time each day for 6 weeks, each school day for 6 weeks. And the control group was not taught the 5-finger rule and was not given the time to read each day. And at the end of the 6 weeks, both groups took the post-assessment, which was the MAP reading test. So the independent samples t-test was used to compare both groups' vocabulary scores on the MAP pre-assessment and the MAP post-assessment, and the prediction was that the experimental group will outperform the control group. So here are my results. I found that on the pre-test, that the t-value was a 1.38, which a 2.0 is kind of a larger difference. So 1.38 is still relatively low. 29 participants, and the p-value is 0.18, which is greater than the alpha level of 0.05, which indicates that the pretest scores were statistically similar. There was no significant difference. And then on the flip side, the post-test scores, the t-value was negative 2.26, which is more than 2.0, larger difference, 29 participants, and the p-value is 0.03, which is less than the alpha value or the alpha level of 0.05, which indicates that there was a significant difference in the mean scores for the control and the experimental group. Here is a look at a figure here which shows and compares the control group and the experimental group, their mean scores. So you can see here control group scored more than the experimental group on the pretest, but then the control group was lower or had a less of a mean score than the experimental group. The experimental group actually scored 11.5 more from their pretest to their post-test, and actually scored 7.26 more than the control group on the post-test. You can stop this here if you want to take a look at this slide. It says pretty much the same thing. So what did the findings show? Findings from this study confirm the hypothesis. The experimental group's post-test mean scores to the control group's mean scores was statistically significant, which shows that sustained silent reading for 6 weeks positively impacts vocabulary growth. So what did I learn? Past research and interventions aligned with the findings from my study. When students are given the time to read a book that interests them, the vocabulary knowledge grows, they're learning more words. So this study adds to the flow theory that when completely involved in a task with a balance of challenge and skill, the task can be achieved. When they had that good fit text at their ability level, it was that balance of challenge and skill. They could be in flow, focused, reading, enjoying, learning more vocabulary words that will eventually help with comprehension. So what are some limitations and recommendations that I have? Well, one limitation is the size and makeup of my group. My group does not represent the general population. And what I mean by that is that they're small in size, 15 participants in the control group and 16 participants in the experimental group. Both groups were predominantly Caucasian. The control group had 20% with an IEP and the experimental group had 6% with an IEP, so not the same. For future researchers, I would consider conducting research that involves not only more participants, but participants of different demographics. Another limitation is the measure that I used. So the educational problem that I really had focused on was low comprehension scores. But the MAP reading test does not measure comprehension. The MAP reading test measures vocabulary. And I was unable to choose another measure that would measure comprehension as well because of my district's policy. So what I would consider is using another measure in addition to or in place of the MAP reading test to measure comprehension. This is going to show you whether vocabulary actually affects comprehension. Another limitation is the timing. So one important part of a true sustained silent reading program is that students are given not only the same time, each day for the same amount of time, but that it's a quiet environment where they can focus. So I had sustained silent reading every single morning, right when the bell rang, to when my first lesson started for the day. So those first 15 minutes. Well, a lot of students did great. They had that good fit text, that they had done the 5-finger rule. They had a good fit. They were in flow. But then others were eating breakfast because my district allows students to eat breakfast in the classroom in the morning if they didn't get it at home. So probably a handful of students would eat breakfast, and I'd ask them to also read, but many were distracted. They were just trying to eat their breakfast. So what I would recommend is that future researchers examine the time of day that sustained silent reading is completed and choose a time where students can focus solely on just reading. Then the last limitation is the good fit book method. So the 5-finger rule aids in choosing a good fit text at their level, but there's really no way to measure if it's the best. Some students still chose a book that they really just loved, but maybe it just was too easy for them, but they still chose it because they love that book. And so it wasn't a challenge to them, but it interested them. So I would suggest that future researchers complete studies to find the best method for determining a student's reading level with an emphasis on student interest. They have to be interested in the text. A teacher can't just say, you're at this level, read that book. They have to also be interested in it. So what are the implications for students, teachers, and parents? Since sustained silent reading increased students' vocabulary growth, this suggests that comprehension will be increased. Sustained silent reading should be implied statewide due to low comprehension scores. Teachers should implement a true sustained silent reading program into their school day, which is just 15 minutes. And if it's done with fidelity, the results will be an increase in student vocabulary growth, which in the long run will hopefully increase comprehension, which is the problem. Students can also implement sustained silent reading at home by setting up a routine for reading 15 minutes a day, providing a quiet environment that is free of interruptions, and then, asking their child if they have to share details about the text that they are reading. It'd be very easy to also implement it at home. So here are the references that I used. I hope you enjoyed.